The steel boot connected with her temple in a sickening crack of bone and leather. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres slammed into the Mojave dust, a crimson stream instantly tracing a path through the grime on her cheek as 47 recruits froze in the blistering California heat. Her elite status as a decorated combat medic meant nothing in that moment of brutal assault. But what shocked the 3 generals who descended on the base 90 minutes later wasn't the attack itself. It was the toxic, deeply rooted culture they unearthed when they started asking questions. Before I tell you exactly what those generals discovered, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The Mojave Desert sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on Fort Irwin until the air itself seemed to vibrate with heat. The morning sun punished the vast, sandy expanse of the training ground, baking the earth into a cracked canvas. Every breath was a searing intake of dust and the faint, bitter scent of creosote bush. Recruits, their faces slick with a mixture of sweat and sunscreen, moved like phantoms through the shimmering heat haze, their boots crunching a rhythmic, weary beat against the gravel. Their movements were punctuated by the sharp, grating commands of the instructors, voices raw from shouting over the relentless desert wind. For Staff Sergeant Maya Torres, this environment was just another day at the office. The killing fields of Afghanistan, the labyrinthine streets of Baghdad, she had operated in crucibles far hotter and more dangerous than this. But Fort Irwin held a different kind of threat. Here, the enemy wasn't an insurgent with a rifle. It was an idea, an insidious culture that saw her very presence not as an asset, but as an affront to a long-established order. At 30, Maya was a study in control competence. Her pale blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun, revealing the faint, silvery lines of scars on her neck, a permanent memento from a Kandahar ID. Her ice blue eyes, having witnessed more life and death than most people could imagine, held a deep, unnerving calm. With 2 tours as a combat medic, 14 commendations, and the unwavering respect of every infantry unit she'd ever supported, her record was impeccable. But here, in the closed ecosystem of instructor culture at Fort Irwin, her accomplishments were liabilities. She was an anomaly, a woman whose combat experience dwarfed that of the men who were supposed to be training the next generation of soldiers. The whispers had started from the moment she arrived, venomous little barbs tossed in her direction when she passed clusters of the other instructors. Probably just a diversity hire. Thinks she's better than us. I bet those medals were earned on her back. Maya had learned the art of selective deafness in war zones, but even the thickest armor can be chipped away. The architect of most of this thinly veiled hostility was Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins. He was a man built like a bulldog, with a shaved head that gleamed under the sun and a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. A faded Marine Corps globe and anchor tattoo was splayed across the knuckles of his right hand, a constant reminder of a past he felt gave him ultimate authority. His eyes, small and deeply set, held a perpetual look of dismissive judgment. He had spent the better part of 2 decades in training roles, and he viewed this domain as his personal fiefdom. Her quiet professionalism was a mirror to his loud-mouthed inadequacy, and he hated her for it. His taunts were relentless in public. "Come on, princess, put some muscle into it. Think you're special, Torres?" He designed his insults to undermine her in front of the recruits, to chip away at the authority her rank demanded. She met his provocations with a crisp, indifferent, "Yes, Sergeant," which only seemed to fuel his rage. This morning's drill was bayonet practice, a brutal, exhausting ballet of simulated violence. The temperature had already climbed past 105 degrees. Maya moved with the fluid efficiency of a seasoned professional. Her strikes were not the most theatrical, but they were surgically precise, landing on the dummy targets with calculated force. While some recruits tried to emulate her economy of motion, one, in particular, was struggling. Private Leo Nash, a lanky teenager from Ohio, was clearly in distress. His face was dangerously flushed, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Maya saw the telltale signs of severe heat exhaustion instantly. The glassy, unfocused eyes, the slight wobble in his knees, the pale, clammy skin beneath the red flush. As Nash stumbled, his rifle clattering to the ground, Maya's training kicked in. She broke formation without a second thought, her body moving on pure, life-saving instinct. She caught him before he fell, one hand steadying his shoulder while the other immediately went to his neck to check his pulse. "You're overheating," she said, her voice low but firm. "Deep breaths. We need to get you cooled down now." That was when Rollins saw his chance. His internal monologue was a snarl of resentment. "She thinks she can just take over? Show me up on my own field? I'll show her the rules here." A blur of motion from her periphery, a boot arcing through the air with vicious intent. The impact was a blinding, explosive crack against her temple. Her vision flashed white, then a sickening crimson, then white again. A sharp, electric pain shot through her skull, and the world tilted violently on its axis. She staggered, one hand flying to her head, her fingers coming away slick and warm with her own blood. A collective gasp swept across the field. 47 recruits stood motionless, their bayonets frozen mid-air, faces a mixture of shock and horror. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the oppressive heat, broken only by the whisper of the desert wind. In the deafening silence that engulfed the training field, every eye was locked on the scene. Maya stood swaying, gritting her teeth against the wave of nausea and the throbbing agony in her head, blood now dripping freely onto the collar of her uniform. Rollins stood a few feet away, chest heaving, a faint, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He had finally broken her composure, or so he thought. He had asserted his dominance in the most brutal way imaginable, and the message was clear to everyone present. This is what happens when you challenge the established order. But Maya refused to fall. She slowly, deliberately straightened her spine, her ice blue eyes locking onto his. The smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cried out. She was just watching him. The spell of horrified paralysis was broken by the frantic squawk of a radio. On the edge of the field, Lieutenant Ben Carter, a young officer tasked with observing the training, stood pale and shaking. What he had just witnessed was a flagrant violation, a criminal act that could not be ignored. With trembling hands, he raised his radio to his mouth, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and duty. "Command, this is Lieutenant Carter at Range 7. We have a code red. I repeat, a code red. An instructor has assaulted a senior NCO. Request immediate medical and command presence. This is not a drill." The words sliced through the tense air, a signal that the insular world of Rollins's training yard had just been breached. Whispers erupted among the recruits, a nervous, fearful murmur that spread through the ranks. It took less than 15 minutes. The low rumble of powerful engines grew steadily louder, and then 3 matte black Chevrolet Suburbans crested a nearby dune, charging onto the training field with an air of unstoppable authority. They kicked up massive plumes of dust, their dark, tinted windows reflecting the terrified faces of the recruits who instinctively snapped to attention, their spines ramrod straight. Even the other instructors, who had stood by and done nothing, stiffened, a new kind of fear replacing their passive complicity. This was not a standard response. This was an overwhelming show of force. The doors of the lead vehicle opened, and out stepped a figure who commanded instant, silent respect. General Eva Rostova. Her silver hair was pinned back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, and her eyes, the color of slate, swept across the scene, missing nothing. Her reputation was legendary. A career spent dismantling toxic leadership and holding commanders accountable. She was followed by 2 other generals, their chests adorned with ribbons that told stories of decades of service and command. Rostova's gaze settled first on Maya, taking in the blood-streaked face and the steady, defiant posture. Then, her eyes moved to Rollins, and the temperature on the field seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Explain," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, a sound that could cut through steel. Rollins's swagger vanished, replaced by a clammy sheen of sweat. "Ma'am," he stammered, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. "I was just testing her grit, ma'am. A mental toughness exercise." Rostova raised a single hand, and he fell silent as if he'd been struck. "Grit is not cultivated by cowardice, Sergeant," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "And discipline is not taught through criminal assault. Who authorized you to strike a fellow soldier?" The silence was so profound that the sound of a distant helicopter seemed to roar in everyone's ears. The other two generals conferred in low tones, their expressions grim. One gestured sharply to a group of aides who emerged from the SUVs, armed with cameras, evidence bags, and digital recorders. "Document everything," the general commanded. "I want photos of Staff Sergeant Torres's injury. I want sworn statements from every single person on this field. Nothing gets overlooked." The recruits watched in a state of surreal disbelief as their training ground was transformed into a crime scene. A few hours ago, Rollins had been a god here. Now he was a suspect. General Rostova approached Maya. "Your report, Sergeant," she said, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of concern. Maya, her head throbbing with a painful, rhythmic pulse, delivered her account. She spoke in the flat, dispassionate tone of a mission debrief, detailing Private Nash's symptoms, her adherence to medical protocol, and Rollins's unprovoked attack. She presented only the facts, knowing they were more damning than any emotional accusation. Rostova listened intently, nodding slowly, her gaze never leaving Rollins's face, cataloging his every nervous tick and flash of panicked anger. The reckoning had arrived. As Maya finished her concise, factual report, the desert air crackled with unspoken finality. The three generals stood like stone judges, their faces grim masks of appraisal. The evidence was irrefutable. A decorated soldier bleeding in the dust, an aggressor whose flimsy excuses had evaporated under the slightest scrutiny, and 47 silent witnesses whose fear spoke volumes. General Rostova took a deliberate step forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled instructors before finally landing on Rollins with the force of a physical blow. The recruits held their breath, a collective stillness gripping the formation. "Effective immediately," Rostova announced, her voice resonating with an authority that left no room for appeal. "All training operations for this unit are suspended. Staff Sergeant Rollins, you are relieved of all duties pending a full Article 128 investigation and court-martial." A quiet, collective gasp rippled through the recruits. It was one thing to see an instructor reprimanded. It was another entirely to witness a figure of absolute power be dismantled in front of their eyes. Rollins's face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. The reality of his career-ending, life-altering mistake finally crashed down on him. He had assaulted a senior NCO, a combat medic no less, in broad daylight, with an audience that now included 3 generals. There was no escape, no justification, no one to protect him. His reign was over. Rostova then turned her attention to Maya, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Staff Sergeant Torres," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your composure and adherence to protocol under extreme duress are a credit to your character and your training. Let me be unequivocally clear. You will face no negative repercussions for this. You have my personal guarantee that any hint of retaliation will be dealt with severely." For the first time, Maya felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. It wasn't just about justice for the assault. It was validation. The system, so often slow and indifferent, was working. While a medic tended to the gash on Maya's temple, a clean, deep cut that would require stitches, the generals convened a short distance away. Their conversation was low and intense, but phrases drifted on the wind, painting a larger, more disturbing picture. 6 years of this. Complaints buried. A pattern of abuse, not an isolated incident. It became clear that the assault on Maya was not the disease, but a symptom of a deep-seated sickness. This unit had been operating under a toxic philosophy of leadership, where fear was mistaken for respect and brutality was disguised as toughness. The other instructors, who had enabled Rollins's behavior through their silence, now stood shifting their weight nervously, realizing their own careers were on the line. Later that afternoon, after the field had been cleared and Rollins had been escorted away by military police, Maya was summoned to a makeshift command post set up in an air-conditioned tent. General Rostova was waiting for her, along with the other two generals. "Sergeant," Rostova began, getting straight to the point. "What happened today has exposed a systemic failure. This unit's training doctrine is broken. It produces bullies, not leaders. We aren't just here to punish one man. We are here to tear down this entire rotten structure and rebuild it from the foundation up." She paused, her slate-gray eyes locking on Maya's. "And we want you to lead that effort." Maya was taken aback. "Ma'am, your record, your actions today, your composure, you embody the standard we need," Rostova continued. "You've seen what true leadership looks like under fire. These recruits have seen it now, too. We are officially asking you to stay on, not just as an instructor, but as the lead advisor for a complete overhaul of this program's curriculum and ethos. We need you to teach them what you know, that true strength is built on a bedrock of respect, not fear." In that moment, Maya's role transformed. She was no longer just a victim of an assault. She was being handed a mandate, an opportunity to effect real, lasting change, to ensure that what happened to her would never happen to another soldier under their command. The path forward would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time at Fort Irwin, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Her new mission had just begun. The weeks that followed the incident were a whirlwind of controlled, deliberate change. Under the direct authority of General Rostova's command, Maya Torres transitioned from instructor to architect. The old training playbook, filled with hazing rituals and fear-based compliance tactics, was ceremonially shredded. In its place, Maya began to implement a new philosophy, one forged in the unforgiving clarity of combat. Leadership through competence and mutual respect. The atmosphere of the unit began to shift, subtly at first, then with undeniable momentum. The air, once thick with tension and fear, began to clear, replaced by a focused, collaborative energy. Maya was a constant presence on the training grounds, her methods a stark contrast to Rollins's reign of terror. She didn't shout, she corrected. She didn't demean, she instructed. Her praise was specific and earned, her criticism constructive and precise. One afternoon, during a complex land navigation exercise, she noticed Private Anna Sharma, a young recruit from a small town in Oregon, struggling with her map and compass, her confidence visibly faltering. The old guard would have berated her in front of her peers. Maya knelt beside her in the dust. "You're disoriented by that ridgeline," Maya said quietly, pointing. "It's a common mistake. You got the fundamentals right, but you're not trusting your instruments over your eyes. Trust the compass. Show me your bearing." She guided Sharma through the process, not by giving her the answer, but by helping her find herself. When Sharma finally locked in the correct course, a look of genuine understanding and relief washed over her face. "I see it now," she said, a small smile breaking through her frustration. "Thank you, Sergeant." That single, quiet interaction was a microcosm of the larger cultural revolution taking place. Of course, not everyone embraced the change. One of the older instructors, a crony of Rollins, attempted to subtly sabotage the new protocols through passive aggression, giving deliberately vague instructions and offering no encouragement. But something remarkable happened. The recruits, empowered by the new environment, began to self-correct. They formed study groups, assisted struggling peers without being asked, and collectively held each other to the high standards Maya was setting. The recalcitrant instructor found himself isolated, his old methods rendered impotent in a culture that no longer responded to intimidation. He was quietly reassigned within a week. The results were not just anecdotal, they were measurable. Anonymous feedback surveys, implemented by Rostova's team, showed a staggering jump in morale and psychological safety. More importantly, the recruits' practical assessment scores began to climb. They were learning faster and retaining more information because their cognitive load was no longer consumed by the stress of constant fear. The culmination of this transformation came a month later during a final capstone exercise, a grueling, multi-phase simulation of a combat deployment. The three generals, including Rostova, returned to Fort Irwin to observe. They watched as the unit, which had been fractured and fearful just weeks before, moved with the seamless cohesion of a veteran team. Commands were relayed clearly and executed without hesitation. When unexpected challenges were thrown into the simulation, the recruits adapted, collaborated, and overcame them with a level of initiative that had been unthinkable under the old regime. It was a flawless demonstration of competence and high morale. Afterward, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the desert, General Rostova approached Maya privately. "What you have done here, Sergeant Torres, is nothing short of remarkable," she said, her voice carrying a rare warmth. "You haven't just retrained a unit, you've proven a principle. This is the new standard. Your work here will be studied. It will change policy." Later that evening, Private Sharma found Maya, her posture now confident and assured. "You taught us that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room," the young woman said. "It's about being the one who makes the whole team better." Maya placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now it's your turn to pass it on." Back in her quarters, Maya cleaned the now healing wound on her temple. The physical pain was long gone, replaced by a deep, quiet satisfaction. An act of violence meant to silence her had instead given her a voice powerful enough to reshape an institution. That single, brutal act of violence, meant to enforce a culture of fear, had instead become the catalyst for its complete undoing. It proved that true leadership is not about the power to dominate, but about the responsibility to protect and empower. The events at Fort Irwin served as a stark, undeniable reminder that integrity is a greater force than intimidation, and that the courage of one person can illuminate the path for many. Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power like this, big or small, in your own life? What would you have done if you were one of those recruits, forced to choose between speaking up and staying safe? Do you believe that one person's courage can truly change a broken system? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective. If this story about courage and integrity resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about true leadership that challenges the status quo. Share this with someone who believes that character is more important than rank, and that respect must always be earned, never demanded. We truly do read every single comment, and your voice is a vital part of this community. More stories about real-life heroes who stood their ground are waiting for you on screen now. Click on one of those to watch next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another incredible story that needs to be told.